A little closer? How about that? Okay. And I'm going to try and stay here and not do my plosives directly into the mic, so no blowing out eardrums. But they've shut the doors, so you're trapped in here with me. Good luck. This is Unleashing the Arcane with the Magic System Blueprint, and we'll get more into what that means in just a bit. Who am I? Well, I am C.R. Rowenson, also known as the Magic Engineer. I am an award-winning author, a writing coach, and most importantly, a magic system obsessed nut job. So as we get into this, I do have a couple questions. Who here saw this presentation last year? Okay, just a couple. Cool. I always try and adjust things so that you guys get the most out of it possible, and there's always a couple routes I can go, but it sounds like we're going to be sticking with the main one here. Is anybody else getting a little feedback? Little? Okay. All right. So for us to really get into this, there's a couple of things that we need to define first, because the way I talk about stuff is a little weird because I can't be normal no matter how hard I try. First off is, what is a magic system? So my definition of a magic system, or magic specifically, is anything enabling actions or abilities beyond our current capability or understanding. Now, that our current capability or understanding is very flexible, which we'll get into a little later, but that's the important part. It's something that is a step beyond what we can do and what we understand. So if that's what magic is, we need to look at what a magic system is, which I guess I'm getting ahead of myself. Magic system is the effects, rules, and patterns that you apply that allow the characters and your audience and yourself to understand the magic, what it can do, and how it works. That's what a magic system is. It doesn't mean you're dealing with a game system. It doesn't mean you're dealing with something super rigorous. It can be as simple as this person flies on a broom and this person uses a wand to cast fireballs. That's still a system. Now, why should you use a magic system? Reason number one is because magic systems are cool. I love them. That's a big part of it, and they can honestly fit into almost any genre. If you're doing something contemporary or realistic historical fiction, not so much. But anything else, magic is fair game. You want to put it in fantasy, fits right in. Sci-fi, you got your advanced tech. If you want to do horror, cosmic horror, any of that stuff, all of the monsters are all magic systems. If you want to do paranormal romance or even sweet romance where there's some kind of mystical element, or gothic tragedy, so many places that magic can go, and magic can improve your stories, which is the other reason you should consider adding a magic system, is they can make our stories more compelling. Has anybody here seen The Babadook? A handful. Okay. The Babadook is a horror movie about a grieving widow with her son and them trying to adjust to the tragic loss of her husband. And it's years later, and the Babadook is a monster. It is the magic system, and it ends up representing her unhealthy coping habits, the way she is dealing with tragedy, and the way it can spiral to really dangerous levels. And it is brilliant, it is terrifying, and it lets you connect with this character and what she's dealing with in ways that I don't know how they would have done it otherwise. Same thing stands for It Follows, if anybody has seen that. That's another horror movie where the monster is a representation of just these concepts that it allows you to explore and feel and consider in ways that you couldn't have otherwise. Or we have Burn For Me by Ilona Andrews, which is a thriller romance fantasy thing going on there, where she takes the bad boy, the dangerous bad boy concept to a whole new level, because the main character is charged with bringing in a dangerous pyromancer who can melt steel with his mind. And in the process, she gets embroiled with Mad Rogan, who is a telekinetic that can level city blocks. Dangerous bad boys, guys. I'm telling you. Or Russian Doll on Netflix. The time loop that they have in there, or what you see in Groundhog Day, allows us to go through a kind of forced character analysis and character progression that would be much harder to do otherwise. At least it would be harder to execute in that fashion. It opens up doors, and it can make different parts of our story more compelling. Now, fortunately and unfortunately, the Presentation I had yesterday got moved through a schedule conflict. It will be this afternoon at 2:30 in Palace 4, and in that one I'm going to be talking more about how to make your magic matter, where we will get more into how to combine the magic with these elements of your story to really amp up both of them. And on top of that, oh yeah, I already kind of said all of that. It can support or augment any component of your story. Another important reason to do magic systems in your stories is I'm more likely to read them if you do. If you don't care about having me as a reader, that's totally fine. But if you put in magic, I am much more likely to pick it up, watch it, read it, play it, listen to it, whatever. And maybe I'm not the only person like this. Who knows? So to understand what the blueprint actually is and where it comes in handy, I also want to talk real quick about the process of building a magic system. So like I said, I'm a writing coach and a magic system nut job. I've been building magic systems longer than I have been writing, like decades longer, before I really knew that's what I was doing. And there are a couple of stages that everybody goes through. It's not always in this order. And I think everybody should go through to do their due diligence in creating a solid magic system. First one, we're all very familiar with. That is your inspiration. You need to find your seed crystal, your core concept. It's kind of your pitch for your magic system. I use seed crystal because I have a background in chemistry. And here's a quick chemistry lesson that none of you asked for or wanted. But in laboratories, they use motes of, so crystals can't actually grow off of nothing. They need a substrate in order to start solidifying and forming their crystalline structure. So in laboratories, they will use a tiny mote of a certain material, allowing the crystal to grow faster, larger, and in higher purities. And that's what you want. You need to find that idea, that concept, that spark, which allows everything else to start growing rapidly off of that idea. After you have that, you need to do idea generation. Because if we want to have good ideas, we need to have a lot of them. I'm pretty sure that's Thomas Edison, but I'm terrible with quotes. This is where you're just going to be doing a brain dump and exploring everything that your magic system can be. Don't worry if it's contradictory. Don't worry if it makes sense. Don't worry if it's going to damage your story at this point. Right now, you just need to get everything out so you can pick the very best. After that, it's alignment. And this is where you start digging into what your magic system needs to be. And this is where making your magic matter comes into play. And also around this stage is where the magic system blueprint comes into play when I'm working with people. It can also, so we've gotten far enough, the magic system blueprint can come into play anywhere between stages 2 and 4, usually, because stage 4 is definition, where you are clearly defining what your magic system can do and what it is. The blueprint is most useful, I have found, when you are operating in one of those 3 stages of generation, alignment, definition, or I guess the next one of restrictions, and where you are looking at what your magic system can't do. Because overpowered characters are boring. Unless you want the overpowered lit RPG subsect, but that's not me. I find those boring. And a lot of people do too. Now, there's a lot of cool stuff you can do if you have an overpowered character, and please come talk to me about that, because I love playing with these little quirks and finding ways to tweak stuff. But you want to make sure you understand what it can do and what it can't do. Next up is testing. You want to put your magic system through the ringer, make sure you understand how big it can scale, how small it can go, and really understand what problems it might cause for your characters, your story, and just the integrity of your world. Now, when you're doing that, you want to pay particularly close attention to the God factors. These aren't guaranteed deal breakers, but they're something to watch. If the magic system in any way can make your character omnipotent or all-powerful, omniscience or all-knowing, omnipresence, give them omnipresence or allow them to be anywhere and everywhere, or grant them infinite wealth, you might have a problem. Not a guarantee, but the closer you get to those extremes, the more likely you are to have problems. Like I said, there are workarounds and things you can do to balance that out. My favorite example is if you wanted to do a superhero dating story, because you may have a character who's powerful enough to punch through the sun. That's not really going to help their dating life. I mean, if it does, that's very strange, and I don't want to deal with that. But And last, you have iteration. This is stage 7. Sometimes people get upset because they've already done a whole bunch of work. But we're writers, I think we get that. Your book isn't perfect on your first draft. Your magic system won't be either. So you need to go through, and then you need to go back and do things again, especially after testing. You've probably found some things you might need to shore up or fix or change. And for me personally, if you have a perfectionist bone in your body, iteration is the way out. Because I have a hard time accepting it, moving forward. I get really focused on finding the right thing to do and making sure it's not going to cause problems. But if I know I'm going to iterate, I can let it go, because this is just a pass. It's not the final pass. And it's a loophole that lets my brain free up, be more creative, and keep processing. And something I didn't say, I'm going to try and have time for questions. But please do hold questions until the end so we can get through all of this. So those are the 7 stages. Like I said, the blueprint usually comes in around stage 2 or stage 3. So that's the process, kind of. The 7 stages are what you need to get a complete magic system that you can actually write with. And you'll see this more as we go through the blueprint. That's what you need to understand all of your effects, who can do what, where people train, all of that kind of stuff. You got to go through the 7 stages to get to that level. But it's not always necessary it's especially not necessary to start. You don't need to have a flawless, completely fleshed out magic system before you start writing. And this varies depending on who you are and the story you're telling. I always start with magic systems, but that's not true for everybody. And not everybody goes in that order of 1 through 7. You can jump around as long as you hit on all of them. Now, to get something more immediately useful, you need to get this high-level concept of what your magic system is, what it kind of does, and give you something so you can explore the implications and impact it can have on your story and on your world. And you need something to help you map out the broad strokes. And that's where the magic system blueprint comes in. So, meet the blueprint. Hopefully it doesn't seem too confusing. We're going to go through that a piece at a time. It is a collection of universal attributes I started to see in all magic systems. And we'll go through what they are, a little bit of what they mean, and if you need more clarification later, we can talk more about implications and potentially how you can change that in your story. So they're all a spectrum with a few exceptions. They're spectrums, they're dials. So as you slide the dials around and move things about, it'll tell you a whole lot about your magic system. So we have a couple of examples up here. I'm going to let you guys look at that for a second while I get some water. So hopefully, even if you haven't seen Lord of the Rings, in which case, what are you doing? Come on, get the extended edition and just do it. If you haven't watched Stargate, even if you haven't read Mistborn, hopefully you are able to look at this and see how some of these systems are different from each other and already get ideas of how that changes how they got used in the story and what that's going to mean for the world. If you don't, that's fine, because we're going to go through them a piece at a time, and we will come back to some of these examples. So here's two more. This is where you're looking at Burn for Me versus Marvel Cinematic Universe. And it's just, I always feel weird doing this because I feel like I'm hawking my wares way too much. But the more I use it, the more I find it's just been an incredibly potent tool for analyzing other people's systems as well as developing my own. Now, okay, so we're going to go through these one at a time. Up at the top, you have the name. That's pretty self-explanatory and is quite possibly the least important part of the blueprint. Because when you're filling it out, you just need to title it something so you know what you're talking about and so that you can refresh yourself when you come back, right? And there is a lot of stuff we could talk about in terms of getting an actual name for your magic, but this can be something that's descriptive, This can be something that's a made-up word. You can write the series name in there. Because I start with magic systems, it's usually very generic. I'll have viral magic, organ magic, gross magic, because that's what I do. It's pretty straightforward, and that's really all you need. We talked briefly about the seed crystal. Like I said, it's kind of the pitch for your magic system, and you want to do what you can to condense it down into about a sentence. There's a reason that the box is as small as it is. The more condensed you can get it, the more powerful it tends to be. Then you have perspective, and we will come back to this. Perspective is incredibly important and incredibly useful. And honestly, I went through months and years developing the rest of the blueprint. The perspective kind of got added on towards the end, and I was a little ticked off when I realized that's actually the most powerful part of the whole darn thing. But we will get into that more. This is identifying the point of view you are analyzing the system from. So initially, the perspective is probably going to be the creator perspective. You, as the author, as the creator of the magic system, you're going to know more and understand the magic in ways that nobody else does. There's lots of other ways you can look at it. You can do it from the protagonist perspective, from the antagonist perspective, from your reader's perspective, and each perspective will be a little different. That kind of answers the question of people saying, well, I know all of the details, but my characters don't. That's because you're talking different perspectives, and you need to map it out from those different angles. Types of magic. Who is familiar with Brandon Sanderson's laws of magic? A couple people. Okay. So he's the one who kind of coined the phrases of hard and soft magic systems, which came from hard and soft sci-fi. And when I'm talking about hard and soft, it's a little different from how Sanderson talks about it. But since it's not overwhelming, I don't have to worry about that too much. So this is broken out into quadrants where you have the two different axes. So when I'm talking about hard and soft, this is purely how much of the magic system is known or understood. Again, how much of the magic system is known or understood. If it's a vast magic system, chances are you, the creator, and especially the characters and your readers, are only going to see a small piece of it. Urban fantasy is a perfect example of your softer magic system, because we know that it's a sprawling hidden world with trolls and witches and fairies, and until you have done 20 books, you probably still haven't covered it all. I mean, how far is Dresden Files, and we still have only seen a small piece of the magical world in the Dresdenverse. If it's harder, we know much more about it. Sanderson does a lot harder magic systems. Allomancy, book 1, there are 10 metals that we know of. We know that there's probably a little more. By the time we get to the end, there's 16. But we know what most of them can do. In the beginning, we think there's just 10, and we know all 10. It's pretty much 100% hard magic system. The other way to think about this is if up on this podium I had a magic box. That magic box is my magic system, has 2 buttons on it, one of them red, one of them blue. First get the box. I know nothing about the magic system, so it's bottomed out at soft. I hit one button, I hit the red button, and flames shoot out the front of the box. I now know 50% of the magic system, so it's right in the middle there. Then once I hit the other button and I know what the other button does, I now know 100% of the magic system, and it is a completely hard magic system. It's a very simple magic system, but at that point, I know everything it can do. Then you have the rational and irrational spectrum. That is all about the application of logic and the ability to extrapolate and follow patterns and chains of thought. That is one of the areas where Sanderson really first started standing out, in my opinion. He focuses heavily on rational magic systems. He says if the characters can do this and it has these quirks about it, then in theory they should also be able to do this, 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 and this. And if you think it through and you follow those patterns and you meet the requirements, you're probably right. For example, in Mistborn, they can push metal directly away from themselves. So they end up using coins as bullets. And one of the countermeasures is people using stone arrowheads. So at one point, the character comes up with a clever application. She snaps off the arrowheads, puts a little piece of metal, a ring of metal, at the base of the arrowhead, and then launches the stone arrowheads that way. So even if another Allomancer pushes back on the metal, it'll just pop the ring off, and they still get hit by the arrowhead. That is the height of rational magic. You can do this kind of problem solving, and rational magic is incredibly valuable if you want to do problem solving in your story. Not essential, but the more rational it is, the more you can do that. Irrational just means, irrational isn't bad. Irrational just means that I only know magic, what the magic can do, once I see it done. Harry Potter is irrational magic. There's all these kinds of spells, but we can't look at all of the charms and all of the curses and all of the spells he's learned and assume that others exist. Even if we just take the spell Expelliarmus, we know that can be used to disarm your opponent of their wand. We don't know if that will work if they're holding a book, a gun, or a knife. And we can't assume that it would, just because of how those stories are told, because if it was fully rational, the characters should have and likely would have done things differently. But because it's an irrational system, we only know what works once we see it, and we just have to take it at that face value. Does that all make sense? That's the weirdest one. If you are most familiar with Sanderson's hard and soft access, his kind of runs diagonal from top right to bottom left. So what Sanderson talks about as a hard magic system is up in the hard rational, and what he talks about as a soft magic system is down in the soft irrational. And I would love to tell you why I added the extra access, but we're going to keep moving forward. Oh, yes. Look at the lovely image that you would have appreciated while I was talking through all of those details. All right, so next we have transference. Transference is all about how easily the magic can be picked up, transferred, handed off, or stolen. So again, how easily can it be adopted, handed off, or stolen? Can I take it away from somebody? Or do they, if they have magic, do they just have magic? Most of your traditional magic systems sit pretty low on the transference scale. You're either born with it or you're not. You have no option to gain it if you don't have it. You have no way to hand it off to other people if you've already got it. And your advanced tech usually sits on the other end of the spectrum, because what good is mass producing a laser rifle if only one person can use these thousands of laser rifles? Maybe that's what happened to the stormtroopers. I don't know. But that's all about transference. Yeah, they worked in some kind of accuracy mechanic. Anyway, next you have prevalence. How far can you go before you run into magic in your world? Does everybody have it? Do you see it on every street corner? Is it hidden, but once you go beyond the veil, it's everywhere? How frequent is it? And when we're looking at it from different perspectives, that can change drastically, which we'll get into. You as the creator, you're kind of looking at the overall magic level of your story. Now, one other thing about prevalence is if you have multiple magic systems, you might want to consider them each individually. You might have one that is incredibly high prevalence, but another magic system in your story that is much lower prevalence, because that's the one that your protagonist gets because they're special and it's cool. But that is prevalence. Then you have source. Source is always a little tricky to explain, because I'm not talking about the origins of your magic in terms of history. What I'm talking about is when somebody produces a magical effect, where does the power for that magical effect come from? If I have a laser rifle, chances are it has a battery pack, it has a magazine, it has some kind of external power source that it draws the energy from, produces the magical effect once I pull the trigger. You might do some really cool cyberpunk where I'm the power source, which would be super cool. So every shot that I fire with this laser rifle, I am draining my own life force, and somebody should absolutely write that, because I really want to see that now. It might also be internal, which is more traditional magic, where the power comes from within me. I am the power source. I have something innate about me that I channel it forward and shape it and direct it. And then you can have all kinds of in-betweens where, like if you're looking at cybernetics, if you're looking at things like in allomancy where they consume the fuel, it can get a little blurry. That's one thing about all of this, especially when we get into the analysis. This is highly subjective and is meant to be helpful to you. So if you fill out the blueprint and then you show it to your fans and they disagree, it doesn't matter. They're just seeing it different from you. And that's not a problem. So that is half of source. Does it come from outside myself or inside myself? And what path does it follow? Does it go from outside myself through myself and then gets directed outward, completely external? Depending on where the source is going to change how people can interact and interrupt your magic users. The next part of source is the amount of power and how that well of power is managed. So it can be infinite, finite, or renewable. This is really important because let's just imagine a scenario where you have a character who is down to a single magical effect that they can produce. Let's say you're playing a game, and they have one spell left. Is it one spell left ever? Or is it one spell left this round or one spell left this day? Depending on what it is drastically going to change people's behavior. So you really want to tap into that. If it's infinite, people can just use it ad nauseum without worrying about running out. If it's finite, once it's gone forever. Renewable sits in the middle. That is the most common one, where there is a pool that can be depleted but will be refilled. And you can make it so it's very tricky to refill. It might be a complex ritual. It might be a really rare material or something like that. The point is, once it's empty, it's only temporary. They can refill it. They aren't out of magic forever. Now you have flux. Flux is another one that I get really excited about. It connects closely with prevalence. In fact, you might already be seeing it, but some of the variables connect strongly to each other. Prevalence and flux are one of those pairs, because flux determines the rate of change of your prevalence. Is the prevalence of your magic system increasing, decreasing, or staying the same? We'll get into some more examples, but again, is your prevalence increasing, decreasing, or staying the same? And again, lots of ways to play with this, lots of ways to blur the lines and explore those gray areas. You might be looking at your world as a whole, where you have two magic systems. One of them is dying out, one of them is growing. But as a whole, magic in your world is staying the same. But when you're looking at each individual magic system, one is negative, one is positive. So flux is about the net change, not just whether anything is leaving or anything is coming in. It's looking at the whole system, and you can define those parameters, and that is part of prevalence. Oh, and that's really useful because you can use flux to indicate where you want things to go in the future. If you want to do another trilogy, if you want to make things complicated later in your series. If you say, yeah, I'm going to start with high prevalence, but it's negative flux, you've got some interesting things coming in your world. Same thing the other way around. It's worth exploring. Then you have naturalness. Naturalness is very cognitive and based on perception. It's about whether it feels like an extension of the setting or not. If it feels like an extension of the setting, it feels more natural. Also, if it has been around longer, it will feel more familiar whether it's technically natural or not. Because if you think about it, walking around seeing somebody with a cell phone now is very natural. Take the cell phone back 50 years, not so natural. And that's just a matter of exposure. But then if you have something different where I'm walking around with some kind of communication device that's made entirely out of wood and bone, in one aspect that's extremely natural because it's highly natural materials, it's going to be extremely unnatural because nobody has seen that before. So you have these different aspects that play into whether it's natural or not. An example I like to give is if let's say you were telling a story with druidic magic where people can communicate with animals, and it's been that way for as long as they can remember. That's topped out on naturalness. It's connected with nature, it's part of the natural world, and it's something we've been doing for a long time. Then, wait for it, aliens. The aliens show up and they have the ability to read our thoughts and control the minds of men. Seems very abnormal, aberrational, and doesn't quite fit. That's going to seem very low naturalness. But as the series continues, we actually learn that the way the aliens are communicating and controlling us is the same core mechanic that we're using to communicate with the animals. All of a sudden that shifts things and all of it starts dropping down, increasing in naturalness. Lots of ways to play with it. Then you have ease of use. Ease of use is about how easily your characters can use it effectively and safely. Again, effectively and safely. The second one is very important because if you have a character that can level a city block with a snap of their fingers but will kill themselves in the process, that's not going to be an easy magical effect to use. Well, it'll be easy to use once. So again, how easy is it to use the magic effectively and safely? Then you have reliability. How often will it produce the effect that I want? Can I trust it to produce the effect that I want? Will it do it every single time, or does it change every number of iterations? Is it random? For people who are familiar with D&D, the wild magic table, where, for those of you who aren't, there's the wild sorcerer. When they cast a spell, they have to roll on another table that will randomly produce a magical effect. And the initial table has like 20 or 100. You can get tables that have thousands of entries. That is very low reliability. Every time you roll, you have no idea what's going to happen. On the other side, more scientific stuff, more reliable stuff, I know that when I speak this incantation, I'm going to be casting a fireball. That's it. And I also want to go back to the box we have, right? Just to run through some of this a little bit. Because going back to the rational and irrational, I said I hit the red button and fire comes out, right? I meant to say this earlier and I forgot. If it is a rational magic system, it will behave in ways that I expect and I can extrapolate from. So if it's rational, it will burn things. I can use it to light a fire, light a cigarette, all of that kind of stuff. If it starts doing something where instead of burning somebody, it heals them, or maybe it like reverse burns objects and reconstructs them, that's no longer rational, or at least it's not very rational. Now, if it does the same thing every time I hit the button, always a gout of fire that behaves exactly the same, it's reliable. If one time it's a gout of fire, another time it's a shower of sparks, another time it's a stream of magma, less reliable. Last, we have consistency, and there is a difference between consistency and reliability. As we've been going through this, hopefully you have been thinking about either your own magic system or a magic system that you have read, watched, or played, and you have probably spotted inconsistencies. Of, yes, this part over here is reliable, but this part over here is not so much. Or this piece is highly transferable, but that piece is not. That is what consistency says. When you are looking at your system overall, how consistent are all of the pieces between themselves? How consistent are the settings of the blueprint across the entirety of your magic system? If the settings will change depending on what piece you are looking at, it is lower consistency. If the settings remain exactly the same, regardless of the effect, the person, or location that you are looking at, then it has higher consistency. All right. So I said I would come back to perspective. One of these, we're looking at it from the audience perspective, Lord of the Rings from the audience perspective. The other one is from Sauron's perspective. Pretty different. I mean, extremely different. Because as a reader, it's soft and irrational. We don't know what Gandalf is capable of. We don't know if he can do the same things multiple times in a row. We don't even fully understand what he does. But when you jump over to Sauron, Sauron is made of magic and has been part of this universe, I think, technically since before time began. He knows how it works. He knows what it is. Magic is his reality, which drives it way up to hard and more rational than irrational. Sauron also knows how to pour his magic into objects. That's how he created the Ring of Power. Nobody else knows how to do that, at least as far as we know, not us as the readers for sure. And again, the world is magic to him. And you have a difference in source. Sauron, all of his stuff is one and the same. And anyway, I'm kind of getting bogged down. One of the big things I wanted to touch on with this is the consistency. Because when we're looking at Lord of the Rings, it can change depending on whether we're looking at Gandalf's powers, the Balrog, magical creatures, or the Rings of Power. They're all kind of different. The Ring of Power, highly transferable. None of the other magic that we've seen with a couple of magic items is transferable at all. Okay, so I can go back to the other examples. That is most of what I've got for now, so we're going to have a bunch of time for questions. I'm going to power through these last few slides. You guys can take pictures because I didn't think ahead and put QR codes on them. You can find me at crrowenson.com or on YouTube as The Magic Engineer. I offer coaching and developmental editing services. You can find more information at crrowenson.com/coaching. I have 2 books out. One is a workbook called Restrictions May Apply to help you identify where you need and help you build limitations for your magic system. Only available in ebook on Amazon. There are 15 exercises in that book. You can download the exercises for free. So just grab that link. You should be able to get those downloaded. If you can't, shoot me an email. Next, we have the blueprint itself. So the book talks about everything I have here and more. Each chapter digs into more details of the different variables, gives more examples, and talks about ways you could change it and the impact it will have on your story, as well as how the different variables connect together. Ebook and paperback are available on Amazon. Hardback is only available where I am available. So I will be selling the hardback tomorrow along with paperback at the book signing event. You can also join my newsletter to get the starter guide, which has the worksheets and additional examples. You can also just get the blueprint if you want. Again, free. I try and put as little as possible behind a paywall. So you can get the blueprint and the glossary for it and a little bit of an explanation through that site. Last, I am going to be doing a live Q&A on November 20th. If you want to learn more, you can follow me on patreon.com/crrowenson. Also, because there was a bit of a mix-up with how to make your magic matter, I'm going to be doing a live stream of that presentation in December. I don't know exactly when yet. If you follow me on Patreon, which is free, it's free to follow, that's where you can get information about that. It is also going to be this afternoon at 2:30 in Palace 4, but if you couldn't make it or somebody else couldn't make it, I will be doing the live stream. And that is it. So we can jump into questions, but just so we can wrap it up, thank you everybody for listening. And whatever you do, keep writing and stay awesome. All right.
Hi, I'm Amy Nova. I write paranormal romance. Do you have any tips or potential pitfalls that you can point out when inside where it's a plot point inside your novel where the hero destroys, alters, or disrupts the existing magic system?
Okay, so your question is tips if you wreck your own magic system?
Correct. If a character does, not you as the author.
Make it a big deal. So one of the big things with magic systems, I completely forgot to mention that. So especially with types of magic, we're seeing trends towards hard rational. I think because of Sanderson and other writers, especially Lit RPG. No one type of magic system is better than any other. They have different strengths and weaknesses, and they can be used and applied in different ways. Lovecraftian horror, soft irrational. Like you can make use of all of them, and I talk about it more in the book. But consistency is generally king with magic systems, but if you're going to be inconsistent, make a big deal about it because your character's reality just changed. That would be like if the coefficient of gravity suddenly changed. It's one thing if in your book you just say over here, oh, it's about 10 meters per second, and later you say it's 15 meters per second. People are going to notice that. And your character should notice that. So if you break it, it needs to be a big deal.
Okay, cool.
Which, by the way, if you find contradictions or gaps, feel free to break your magic system and piece it back together and just be like, oh no, everything fell apart.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned the seed crystal. Can you give some examples? Because you said it needs to keep it one word or as short as possible. Can you give some examples of seed crystals for magic systems?
Now, I can't give any examples of other people's magic systems because I don't know what they were thinking when they built it. As much as I wish it was otherwise, I did not write Mistborn, unfortunately. But one example for the virus-based magic system, there are magical viruses where people's magical power grows as the virus grows. So they are most powerful when they are most sick. Or another one with the organ magic. Magic is performed by butchering magical creatures and grafting the organs onto yourself. Because I do gross, terrible things. Another example from some of the videos you can find on my YouTube channel is magic system where everybody has a personal sun, and the attributes of the sun determine the attributes of your magic system. Or mankind has discovered a new kind of energy molecule or energy particle known as Arcanes, which can be used to transfer, transform, and direct new sources of energy. Those are all seed crystals, because with that you know a bit about the magic. You can immediately start to see how it's going to shape things and how it might be used.
Thank you.
Hey, I've got a main character shapeshifter. He turns into a finite number of animals, and if he stays as one for too long, he gets stuck there. So the stake. Trying to figure out like where to play with that on your blueprint, so that danger or cost or risk of using the magic, where would I turn the dial on your blueprint?
So that is an excellent question. There are facets of building your magic system that didn't make it onto the core blueprint that are in the extended blueprint. So writing some things about the limitations and the restrictions aren't necessarily reflected on there, which is something I meant to point out. Is you can see we went through all of that, and I gave some examples, and we know so much about how the magic system can be used without talking about a single magical effect.
Okay.
So you will need to explore more. That's a good limitation. One of the other things you can do is there's a lot of exercises in the restrictions may apply that will help you come up with some solid restrictions to add some more danger to it. One of the big ones is to recombine things. So take restrictions you like from other people's stories and meld them into something new. You have a time limit so that he's stuck there, but if you wanted to, you could take the concept from Wheel of Time, where the more they use the magic, the more insane they go, where it's a time limit before they lose their conscious mind. That's a big difference. And then as they go past that, it may not be immediate, but they're effectively suffering brain damage. And that's scary and gives you a lot of room to play with.
Cool. Well, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a specific question, but I don't think I wrap my head around flux. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yes. Okay. So flux comes from another chemical engineering term, which is the flow into or out of a boundary. So when you're doing your perspective, you might set it to be a protagonist. You can also set it to be a specific world, a specific nation. And then within those bounds, how is the magic changing? So Lord of the Rings, flux is decidedly negative. We have killed off, we have destroyed Sauron, the elves are leaving, and some of the rings of power have been destroyed, and some magical creatures are dead. There is less magic in the world than there was before. Where if you look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we start with Iron Man. We have one hero. And then the villains start appearing, and then more heroes start appearing, and then there's more, and there's more, and there's more as the magic continues to build and the flux is positive. Does that help? Okay.
Not one magic system is better than the other. I am curious, though, the most popular or table conversation stories, at least in my own world, which is small, tend to be soft and irrational. Can you give some examples beyond Mistborn of hard, rational, popular, mainstream stories?
Yeah, so hard rational systems, you have things like most of your game systems are going to be hard rational. Give me 1 second, actually. Let's see, we've got a whole bunch here. Nope. So horror in general tends to be more soft, irrational. Anything where you want to be problem solving is going to be more hard rational. From what I have off the top of my head, Sanderson is the main go-to. Patrick Rothfuss, the sympathy. The King Killer Chronicles is especially interesting because he has 3 different magic systems there that are 3 different types of magic systems. Sympathy is hard rational. It's a science they study, they learn. The naming is more hard irrational-ish. And then the Chandrian are completely soft and irrational, mostly because we know nothing about them. So that would be, again, a lot of lit RPG where you're doing problem solving. We can talk more. I'm sorry I'm not getting any good examples off the top of my head. Again, hard rational is good where you have a simple system and you want to solve plot problems. Soft irrational is great for a sense of wonder or a sense of horror. Soft rational is generally where you end up with a broad, expansive world that has rationale behind it. And that's where a lot of advanced tech sits. So I completely went over time. I'm sorry. I do have business cards up here with cards with QR codes. Please do email me if you have questions. I have free consultation sessions. If you are having problems with anything with your story, just let me know. And I will be around so I can also answer questions after this if you don't have anything immediately after. So thank you everybody for being here.